I never thought I'd be sitting in my Honda Civic in a McDonald's parking lot at 57 years old, trying to figure out where I was going to sleep that night. The smell of French fries mixed with the musty odor of my old car, and I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. 3 months ago, I had an office downtown. Now I was counting the $8.50 in my wallet, wondering if that would cover a cup of coffee. My name is Ron Foster, and let me tell you how I went from running a successful construction business to sleeping in my car overnight. The collapse happened fast. 32 years building Foster Construction from nothing, and it all disappeared in a matter of weeks. The Morrison project was the final nail in the coffin. When their foundation cracked due to soil issues we couldn't have predicted, they came after us with everything. My insurance company found a technicality to deny coverage, and suddenly I was facing an $800,000 judgment I couldn't pay. I lost the business first, then the house. The bank didn't care about my decades of perfect payment history. Numbers on paper don't have feelings, and mine were all red. That's how I ended up at my son Tim's door on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a single suitcase and what was left of my pride. Tim lived in a beautiful colonial house in the suburbs with his wife Patty. She had expensive taste, and it showed in every detail of their home. "Dad," Tim opened the door looking surprised. "I thought you were coming this weekend." "Plans changed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is now a bad time?" Before he could answer, Patty appeared behind him. I'd never been her favorite person, but the look she gave me that day was different. It wasn't just dislike, it was something closer to disgust. "Ron," she said, my name sounding like a burden. "Tim told me about your situation." I shifted the suitcase to my other hand. "I was hoping I could stay for a few days, just until I get back on my feet. I won't be any trouble." Patty crossed her arms, and I watched Tim's posture change immediately. He'd always been a good kid, but somewhere along the way he'd learned to read his wife's moods like weather patterns. "The thing is," Patty continued, "we have the Hendersons coming to stay this weekend, and you know how small our guest room is." I looked at Tim, waiting for him to say something. We both knew the Hendersons lived 20 minutes away and had never stayed overnight in their lives. "Maybe there's a motel nearby," Tim said, finally not meeting my eyes. "Something temporary until you figure things out." Standing there on their doorstep, I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with money or houses. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, put through college even when it meant taking on extra debt. "I see," I said quietly. Patty's expression softened just enough to look sympathetic. "It's not that we don't want to help, Ron. It's just that this is such a difficult time for everyone. Tim's been so stressed about work, and I'm dealing with my mother's health issues. We barely have the emotional bandwidth to handle our own problems." Emotional bandwidth, I wondered, when caring for family became something that required bandwidth like an internet connection. "Of course," I said, "I understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the same woman who'd called me every time she needed help moving furniture or wanted someone to watch their dog during vacation trips could suddenly find me too much of a burden for a few nights on their couch. "There's a Hampton Inn about 10 minutes from here," Tim said, finally looking at me directly. "It's not too expensive." I checked their website on my phone before coming over. 3 nights would wipe out most of what I had left. "That sounds perfect," I lied. Patty brightened immediately, the way people do when an uncomfortable situation resolves itself in their favor. "And once you're settled somewhere permanent, we'd love to have you over for dinner, maybe next month." Next month, when the inconvenience of my presence would be limited to a few hours and a home-cooked meal. I hugged Tim goodbye, and for a moment he held on a little longer than usual. I thought maybe he was going to change his mind, invite me in, tell Patty that his father needed help, and that was that. Instead, he patted my back and said, "Take care of yourself, Dad." Walking back to my car, I heard their front door close with a soft click that sounded final. I sat in their driveway for a few minutes, watching their house. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds arranged with magazine precision. Through the living room window, I could see Patty moving around, probably already forgetting I'd been there. The Hampton Inn was full. So was the Holiday Inn Express and the 2 budget motels I tried after that. Apparently there was some kind of conference in town, and every room was booked. By 800, I was parked behind a 24-hour diner, trying to figure out how to sleep in a Honda Civic without looking like a homeless person. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire career building homes for other people, and now I couldn't find a place to sleep. That's when my phone rang. The number on my phone wasn't one I recognized. After the day I'd had, part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but desperation makes you answer calls you might otherwise ignore. Ron Foster speaking. The voice was formal, precise, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Mr. Foster, my name is Albert Cooper. I'm calling on behalf of my employer, Mr. Leonard Martinez. He would very much like to meet with you tomorrow morning if you're available." I shifted in the driver's seat, trying to get comfortable against the Honda's worn upholstery. I'm sorry, who? Leonard Martinez. Albert repeated patiently. He's requested a meeting with you at 10 to tomorrow morning. It's quite urgent, I'm afraid. The name meant nothing to me. In 32 years of construction work, you meet a lot of people, but Leonard Martinez wasn't ringing any bells. I think you might have the wrong Ron Foster, I said. I don't know anyone by that name. There was a pause, then the sound of papers rustling. Ronald James Foster, born April 8, 1967, previously owner of Foster Construction? My stomach tightened. How do you know about my business, Mr. Martinez has been quite specific about wanting to meet with you. He's not in the best of health, and time is rather precious. I'm afraid I can't discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you that Mr. Martinez is prepared to compensate you for your time. Would $200 be sufficient for a 1-hour meeting? $200? More than I'd seen in weeks. I thought about my 8 Virion Fivires, about sleeping in my car, about the look on Patty's face when she'd suggested a motel, where the Martinez estate. I can send you the address. Shall we say 10? I'll be there. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone screen. The whole conversation felt surreal, like something that happened to other people. Rich strangers didn't just call up failed contractors and offer them money for meetings. But then again, a week ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd be sleeping in my car either. The address came through a few minutes later, 37 Elmridge Drive. I plugged it into my GPS and wasn't surprised to see it was in Millbrook Heights, where the houses started at $2 million and went up from there. I tried to sleep that night, but the Honda seats weren't designed for someone my size. Every time I started to doze off, a car would pull into the diner's parking lot, headlights sweeping across my windshield. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man had enough money to pay $200 for an hour of a stranger's time. By morning, I was stiff, tired, and more than a little nervous. I cleaned up as best I could in the diner's bathroom, combing my gray hair with my fingers and splashing cold water on my face. The man in the mirror looked older than 57, worn down by months of stress and a night in a car. The Martinez estate was everything I'd expected and more. The gates alone probably cost more than most people's cars, electronic and imposing, with emblems worked into the iron scrollwork. A voice came through the intercom before I could even announce myself. Mr. Foster, please proceed to the main house. The driveway curved through what looked like a professionally maintained park. Ancient oak trees lined the path, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The house, when it finally came into view, wasn't just large, it was magnificent. Colonial architecture with modern touches, probably 15,000 square feet, sitting on grounds that seemed to stretch forever. I parked my Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling like I'd brought a skateboard to a car show. Albert Cooper met me at the front door. He was exactly what I'd pictured, tall, thin, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than my car. His gray hair was perfectly styled, and his handshake was firm but brief. Mr. Foster, thank you for coming. Mr. Martinez is waiting for you in his study. He led me through rooms that belonged in a museum. Persian rugs covered hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors. Oil paintings and heavy frames lined the walls, and every piece of furniture looked like it had been handcrafted by someone who'd never worried about money. The study was smaller than the other rooms, but somehow more impressive. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive mahogany desk, and windows that looked out over gardens that probably required a full-time staff. Leonard Martinez sat behind the desk in a wheelchair, and I could see immediately that Albert hadn't been exaggerating about his health. He was thin to the point of frailty, his skin pale and papery, but his eyes were sharp, alert, studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Ron Foster, he said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. Please sit down. I took the chair across from his desk, my work boots looking out of place on his expensive rug. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you, Mr. Martinez. I have to admit, I'm curious about what this is regarding. He smiled, and for a moment something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe sadness. It was gone too quickly for me to be sure. Tell me, Ron, do you remember a rainy night 8 years ago, October 15th, to be exact? Route 12, just outside Millbrook. My blood went cold. I hadn't thought about that night in years, had tried not to think about it, but suddenly I was right back there. Rain pounding on my windshield, the curve coming up too fast, the headlights in the wrong lane. How do you know about that? Leonard Martinez leaned forward in his wheelchair, his pale hands folded on the desk. Because, Ron, I was in the other car. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of the chair, my heart pounding as that night came flooding back in vivid detail. The rain, the screech of brakes, the sickening sound of metal against metal. I'd tried so hard to forget, but some memories refused to stay buried. You were in the BMW, I said slowly, the one that went through the guardrail. Yes, that was me. October 15th, 8 years ago. I'd been driving home from a job site, exhausted after a 14-hour day trying to finish a kitchen renovation before the weekend. The rain had started around sunset and hadn't let up. Route 12 was always dangerous in weather like that, with its sharp curves and steep drops, but I'd driven it 1,000 times. I was coming around the bend near Miller's Creek when I saw the headlights. They were in my lane, coming straight at me. The BMW was hydroplaning completely out of control. I had maybe 2 seconds to react. You swerved. Leonard said quietly, watching my face. You could have stayed in your lane. The impact would have been head-on, but the other driver would have taken most of the damage. Instead, you swerved right into the guardrail. I remembered the decision, if you could even call it that. It was pure instinct. See danger, avoid it. I yanked the wheel hard right, sending my truck into a skid that carried me straight into the metal barrier. The guardrail had held, barely, but my truck was totaled. You went through the rail, I said, the memory becoming clearer. Down into the creek, 20 feet down, Leonard confirmed, the car landed upside down in 3 feet of water. The impact knocked me unconscious. I closed my eyes, seeing it again. After my truck had come to a stop, I'd sat there for a moment, dazed, checking to see if anything was broken. That's when I'd heard the splash from below, seen the headlights pointing up through the rain. You climbed down, Leonard continued. The embankment was muddy, steep. You fell at least twice, I'm told. By the time you reached my car, it was filling with water. The details were coming back now, sharp and clear. The BMW had been crumpled like a tin can. Driver side down in the creek. Water was pouring in through the broken windows. I'd waded in, soaking myself to the waist in freezing October water. The door was jammed, I said softly. You broke the passenger window with a rock. Cut your hands doing it. Then you pulled me out through the opening. I remembered that part vividly. Leonard had been unconscious, dead weight, blood running from a gash on his forehead. Getting him through that window and up the embankment had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done physically. By the time I dragged him to the road, my back was screaming and my hands were torn up from the broken glass. The ambulance came, Leonard said. You rode with me to the hospital, stayed until my wife arrived. The doctor said if I'd been in that water for another few minutes. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. You saved my life, Ron. I shifted uncomfortably in the chair. Anyone would have done the same thing. Leonard's laugh was bitter, would they? The police report said 3 other cars passed the scene before you arrived. 3 people who saw my headlights in the creek and kept driving. I hadn't known that. After that night, I'd tried to put the whole thing behind me. My insurance had covered the truck. I'd been unhurt except for some cuts and bruises, and I'd gone back to work the next Monday like nothing had happened. Why didn't you ever contact me? Leonard asked. After that night, you never called, never came by the hospital. I thought about how to explain it. It wasn't my business. You were alive, that's what mattered. I figured you had your own life to get back to my own life. Leonard repeated, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Do you know what I was doing that night, Ron? Why I was driving in weather like that? I shook my head. I was running away from my wife, from my business, from everything. I just found out that my company was about to be investigated for environmental violations, fraud that could have sent me to prison for 20 years. I was scared, panicked, and I was driving to the airport to catch the first flight out of the country. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. The accident changed everything, Leonard continued. While I was recovering, my lawyers found a way to clean up the mess, the investigation went away, the charges were dropped. By the time I was back on my feet, I had a second chance. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. I built this empire because of that night, Ron, because you gave me the chance to make things right. Martinez Industries is worth $25 million today. I own real estate in 6 states, manufacturing facilities in 3 countries. All of it exists because you pulled me out of that creek. My head was spinning. I don't understand why you're telling me this. Leonard opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. Because I'm dying, Ron. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 2 months, maybe 3, and before I go, I need to settle my debts. He pushed one of the documents toward me. It was covered in legal language I didn't understand, but I could make out enough to see dollar amounts with a lot of zeros. This is my will, Leonard said. As of yesterday, you are the sole beneficiary of my estate. I stared at the paper, the words not making sense. What? Everything, Ron. The house, the business, the investments, all of it goes to you. I struggled to find words. That's impossible. You have a family, children. Leonard's expression darkened. I have a son who hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. He's waiting for me to die so he can inherit enough money to support his gambling addiction and his third wife's shopping habits. I have a daughter who calls me twice a year on my birthday and Christmas, and only to ask for money. Neither of them was in that creek 8 years ago. I pushed the document back toward him. I can't accept this. You don't have a choice. It's already done. The papers are filed. The lawyers have been paid. When I die, everything becomes yours. But why? I mean, I appreciate the gesture, but what happened that night? It was just human decency. It doesn't deserve this. Leonard leaned back in his wheelchair, studying me with those sharp eyes. Do you know what you did after you pulled me out of that water, Ron? You gave me your jacket. You were soaking wet, shivering. Your hands were bleeding, and you gave me your jacket to keep me warm. Then you sat with me in the rain until help arrived. You held my head to keep the water out of my mouth. I had forgotten about the jacket. You didn't know who I was. For all you knew, I was some drunk who'd nearly killed you, but you treated me like I mattered, like my life had value. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Anyone would have. No, Leonard interrupted firmly. Anyone wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and driven away. You stayed. You cared. And in 30 years of business, dealing with thousands of people, you're the only person who ever showed me genuine kindness without wanting something in return. He pulled out another document. This one was shorter and simpler. There's something else you need to know before you make any decisions about your family. He opened a thick file folder I hadn't noticed before, one with my name written on the tab in neat handwriting. I've been keeping track of you, Ron. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, seeing my expression, but I wanted to know how you were doing, whether you needed anything. I hired a private investigator to do periodic financial and legal checks, all within proper legal boundaries. My stomach clenched. What kind of checks? The last report came in 2 weeks ago. I know about your business, about the lawsuit, about losing your house. I know you went to your son for help. Leonard opened the file and pulled out several photographs. They were surveillance shots taken with a long lens. Me standing on Tim's doorstep, Patty's face in the window, me walking back to my car. My investigator also gathered legally obtained financial records and public documents. Your son and his wife are in serious debt. He pulled out another document with Tim's name at the top. Tim owes $68,000 in combined credit card debt and personal loans. Patty has a shopping addiction they've been hiding for years. Their mortgage is underwater, and they're 5 months behind on payments. How do you know all this? Credit reports, court filings, public records, all legally accessible information. Leonard's expression was grim. They're facing foreclosure, Ron. Within 6 months, they'll lose their house. But Tim said business was good. He got that promotion last year. The promotion came with a salary increase of $6,000 annually. Patty's spending increased by $35,000 over the past 2 years. She spends more on clothes in 3 months than most people make in a year. I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. They're broke. Worse than broke. They're drowning and they know it. Then why wouldn't they help me if they understood what it was like to struggle? Leonard's expression was sad, because admitting they had problems would have meant admitting Patty was wrong, and in their house, Patty is never wrong. It was easier to paint you as the irresponsible one. Leonard died on a Tuesday morning, exactly 5 days after our meeting. I got the call from Albert while I was having breakfast at the diner. The funeral was private, he said, just immediate family. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. I spent those days in a strange kind of limbo. I'd upgraded from sleeping in my car to a decent motel room, but I didn't dare make major plans. Part of me still couldn't believe this was real. Friday morning came, and I arrived at the law offices of Gerald Parker and Associates. Leonard's son Carl and daughter Susan sat at the massive table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The lawyer read the will in that measured legal tone. To my son Carl, who has spent years waiting for me to die so he can inherit money to support his gambling debts, I leave the sum of $100,000. To my daughter Susan, who has called me 16 times in 5 years, each time to request money, I leave the sum of $100,000. Carl's face went white. What the hell is this? The remainder of Leonard Martinez's estate, valued at approximately $18 million, including all business interests, real property, and investments, is left to Ronald James Foster. The silence was complete. Carl and Susan stared at me like I'd materialized from thin air. Who the hell is Ron Foster? Susan finally asked, according to your father, Mr. Foster saved his life 8 years ago in an automobile accident. They left without saying goodbye, their faces set in fury and disbelief. As I walked to my car afterward, my phone rang. Tim's name appeared on the screen. Dad, I just heard. Is it true about Leonard Martinez? It's true, $18 million. That's incredible. There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not excitement exactly, more like calculation. Listen, Patty and I were talking, and we feel terrible about the other day. We were stressed, overwhelmed. We'd love to have you over for dinner tomorrow night to celebrate and apologize. I sat in my car outside the law office. 24 hours ago, these same people had told me they didn't have the emotional bandwidth to help their homeless father. Now they wanted to celebrate. That's very generous. Let me think about it. Of course, we'll be here whenever you're ready. I arrived at Tim's house the next evening at exactly 7, carrying a bottle of wine. Patty answered the door wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Ron. She embraced me like we were old friends. I'm so happy you could come. The house looked different, cleaner, like they'd spent the day preparing for an important guest. The dining room was set with their good china, candles flickering. Tim appeared, grinning broadly. Dad, come in. Can I get you a drink? After we settled in the living room, Tim finally spoke. So this inheritance thing, that's really something. $18 million, Patty said, shaking her head. I can't even imagine. Patty leaned forward. Ron, before we go any further, Tim and I need to apologize for the other day. We handled that terribly. We were stressed, Tim added. The truth is we were trying to protect you. We knew how proud you are. We thought if we offered help right away, you'd feel like a charity case. It was tough love. That's very thoughtful, I said, taking a sip of water. Family is the most important thing in the world, Patty said, squeezing my hand. Of course, I said. Family is everything. After dinner, Patty brought out photo albums. Family is everything, isn't it? I hope you can forgive us, she said with tears in her eyes. So we're okay. Tim asked hopefully. Oh, we're fine, I said. In fact, I have something for you. I pulled out 2 envelopes, handing one to each of them. Inside were cashier's checks for $30,000 each. Dad, what's this for? It's a gift from someone who understands what it's like to be struggling financially. They looked confused. Struggling, Patty said. We're not struggling. I pulled out Leonard's folder and set it on the coffee tables. Actually, you are $68,000 in debt, 5 months behind on your mortgage. Facing foreclosure within 6 months, the color drained from their faces. The same way I know you planned this reconciliation 3 days ago, discussing how to handle the situation now that I have money. Patty's mouth opened and closed. Tim leaned forward desperately. Dad, we love you. No, I said quietly, you love what I can give you. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. The checks are yours to keep. Consider it payment for a valuable lesson. What lesson? Patty asked. That your father isn't stupid, and sometimes karma takes a while, but it always collects. We're family, Patty said, tears streaming. Family forgives each other. I paused at the door. You're right. Family does forgive. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending things didn't happen. What are you saying? Tim asked. I'm saying goodbye. 18 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my new house watching the sunset over the lake. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. Paid for with cash, no mortgage, no debt. I'd kept Leonard's businesses running, hiring good people. Tim had called dozens of times over the months, leaving voicemails I hadn't returned. I'd heard they'd avoided foreclosure with my gift, but barely. I'd made new friends in my new town, people who invited me to barbecues and poker games. I'd also started volunteering at a local veteran shelter, helping guys who reminded me of myself not too long ago. It turned out that being truly wealthy wasn't about the money. It was about the freedom to choose who you spent time with, who you helped, who you loved. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, I thought about Leonard Martinez and the night that changed both our lives. He'd been running away when I pulled him from that creek, but maybe he'd been running toward this moment, toward giving someone else the freedom he'd found. I raised my glass toward the evening sky. We did okay, Leonard. We did okay. The evening air was filled with the sound of crickets and water lapping against the shore. Somewhere in the distance, a family was having a barbecue, their laughter carrying across the lake. It was the sound of people who actually enjoyed each other's company, who chose to be together. The sound of real family, the kind you create rather than the kind you're born into. I closed my eyes and listened to that beautiful sound of chosen love. Sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you're born into, but the one that chooses to stand by you when you have nothing left to offer. Real wealth isn't measured by the zeros in your bank account, but by the freedom to walk away from people who only see your value in dollars.